Found a giant stick in the woods. There's never been a human that didn't use wood as a tool. I found some pretty graphic footage of a chimpanzee fishing a squirrel out of a log. Poor little chap, but it really illustrates just how long humans have been using tools. All apes use wood as tools in some way. There's never been a human that didn't know how to use wood as a tool or for anything else. I know this is a bit of a cliche, but it is really true. If wood preserved better, we wouldn't consider the Stone Age the Stone Age. We'd call it the Wood Age. It just doesn't survive archaeologically. It's gonna rot. Look, it's only been in the ground for probably a month. It's already rotting away. However, in rare circumstances, wood does survive. And yeah, I've been finding some really cool examples of extremely ancient wood.
Okay, take a look at this. What you are looking at is a photo of a piece of wood recovered from Kalambo Falls in Zambia on the shores of Lake Tanganyika. It's actually the world's second deepest lake, which I did not know at all. It goes down to 1,471 meters in places. Pretty crazy. What you are looking at, though, is the remains of some form of ancient joint. You can see there's a pole extending up into this little crevice. It's actually like a carved joint. You can see it most clearly here. There's really been a notch that's been taken out of this wood. What's truly incredible is their age, though. They were dated to roughly 476,000 years ago. That's so long ago. Which means it wasn't modern humans doing this, but probably someone more like this person here. This is the Kabwe cranium, found in the Kabwe mine in Zambia, just about 700 kilometers south of where those wooden artifacts were excavated. At 300 years old, it's about the same age as the earliest modern human remains we have from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, in the north of Africa. But clearly it belongs to a different population, right? It's got these super thick brow ridges, very shallow forehead. The cranium is really more archaic. It's really typical of this time period we call the muddle in the middle, this middle Paleolithic time period, middle Pleistocene.
It really highlights how at this time in Africa, there are many different human groups, and all of them probably were using wood as tools. And that takes a lot of problem solving, right? It really does take a lot of problem solving. The ability to understand strength and weight and balance, all of these things, it says a lot about the intelligence of whatever human, whatever kind of human was making these structures. Makes you wonder, really makes you think. I know we think of these people as cavemen, that's always the phrase cavemen, but man, if you could go back in time, how were these people living? Really, out in the wild? They are going to be up to all sorts, absolutely. Although we don't have any art that survives from this time, just the ability to understand all those different forces at play, it really shows the kind of creativity and problem solving that's just so human. Speaking of problem solving, do you have a problem with your headphones? Are they rubbish? Well, this message is sponsored by Raycon. Guys, get yourself some new headphones. Back to school, back to work, treat yourself, whatever. Get yourself some new Raycon headphones. Raycon's open ear headphones keep you feeling light, keep you feeling flexible, on the go, free and easy. They've got this open ear design, as you can see. Open ear design.
I use them. I love to wear them when I'm going for a walk in the woods. Nice audio quality, and I can still hear the birds.
Fit and comfy. They've got this multi-angular hook. It really will fit anyone's ear. Multi-point connection, so you can connect to a bunch of different devices. And over 36 hours of battery life. There's 8 hours in the headphones and 36 hours in the case. Raycon delivers the same quality as all the other big brand names, but at half the price. Don't overpay for no reason. More importantly than that, they sound amazing. They work great. And over 3 million people use them. They have even a 30-day happiness guarantee, so there's really no risk if you don't like them. If you're in the market for some new headphones and you feel like helping out my channel,
click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/Stefan Milo Open to get 30% off essential open earbuds. That's buyraycon.com/Stefan Milo Open. When you think of someone using wood in the Paleolithic, in the Stone Age, you're probably thinking of a club. A caveman holding a club. But if not that, Probably the bow and arrow, right? I would imagine so. The bow and arrow is really kind of our first proper weapon, I would say. Maybe that's an exaggeration. But it is the ultimate combination of like human intelligence, wood, sinew, fibers, all of these coming together to create something that no other animal could do. The oldest piece of wood that we have that might be a bow comes from Mannheim Vogelstang in Germany. Great name. It's about 17.5 thousand years old, and sadly only fragments of it survive. So is this a bow, or is this something else? Hard to say for sure. The earliest complete bows we've ever found archaeologically, I think, are from Holmgard in Denmark. Made from elm, they're an astonishing 9,000 years old. Fortunately, the boggy conditions in Denmark allowed them to be preserved for millennia. I wonder what it is about bogs that preserves things so well. Do they have like no oxygen, or is it just that they're wet? I don't know. What is it about bogs that preserves wood so well? Yeah, the one thing I really love on this bow is the handle, the carved out handle. I love any sign of anything being ergonomic. It really shows that this was a real object made by a person, that it was handled. Does that make sense? Like, they had the same hands as us. They wanted it to fit their hand well. They wanted it to not give them a splinter. I don't know. I just love any attention to detail like that. Surely the bow and arrow is much older than 9,000 years, though. If we want to push that further back in time, we have to rely on stone, it seems. We have to rely on stone. I've even got an arrow. This is a replica Neolithic arrow. The key thing about an arrowhead, right, is that the head can only get so big. It can't really be as big as a spear tip, because it has to fly really far and really fast. It can't be as big as a spear tip. Can we find these small stones in the archaeological record? That's basically the question. These stone points were excavated in Mandrin, France. Just look at the scale bars here. They're like 1 centimeter maximum, some of these points. They're absolutely tiny. Tiny little points, tiny delicate pieces of stonework. Could such tiny points be the tip of a spear? Possibly, right? Possibly. I think it's much more likely they created something like this, some sort of small composite flint arrowhead, something like that. I think that's much more likely. What's incredible about these finds is that they are 54,000 years old. That's really important because the earliest human remains, modern human remains we have from Europe, are about 45,000 years old. These little tiny arrowheads, these little tiny points here, are possibly the first evidence we have of modern humans in the continent of Europe. Either that, or they were made by Neanderthals, which isn't currently the preferred idea, because basically bow and arrow, it seems to be fully associated with modern humans. We don't have evidence of Neanderthals ever doing anything like that. These tiny points are only in one specific layer of the site, and both above and below them, the more typical larger points made by Neanderthals are found. So the simplest explanation is that there was one particularly intrepid group of modern humans that was in the south of France temporarily 54,000 years ago, whilst it was still a landscape basically dominated by Neanderthals. Once they left, the Neanderthals returned. Interesting. The things you can learn from tiny pieces of flint, things you can learn from a little arrowhead. I cannot get the camera to focus on this arrow. Down in South Africa, we have another very interesting collection of stones. These tiny flakes are again not much bigger, just a couple of centimeters, and are argued to be transverse arrows, sideways arrows, basically. We know these very well from history and archaeology. There's a great example from the Middle Kingdom. There's another example from a Danish bog, and these are ones from South Africa are basically argued to be arrowheads based on their sort of impact scars. Experimentally, you get the same results from firing an arrow, basically, the same damage to the rock.
What's really interesting about those arrowheads from southern Africa, though, is that they date to 64,000 years ago, which is about 14,000 years before we think out of Africa happened, or at least the out of Africa that all modern non-Africans descend from. And you can't help but think, is like arrow technology part of sort of a technological revolution at that time which allowed us to expand? We really did expand super quick around the world right then. Was there something that changed? Was it the fact that we could now launch arrows super quick at prey? other humans. Who knows, right? Who knows? It's interesting to wonder what role wood and the harnessing of wood and sinew and human creativity played in that expansion out of Africa.
Speaking of expansion across the planet, wood is of course essential to that. Boats, ocean voyaging, impossible without wood up until very recently, just a couple of hundred years ago. Now, we have some spectacular boats preserved from history. One very famous one, the Khufu barge from next to the Great Pyramid. Man, imagine the parties that went down on that boat if the planks could talk. But I really want to highlight this really interesting boat. So what you are looking at here is a 6-meter chunk of a Polynesian voyaging canoe. It even has holes all the way around it still for the lashings of other planks. It was found here on the muddy banks of the Anaweka River on the South Island of New Zealand. Radiocarbon dates of the canoe and little caulking fibers still found in association with the canoe shows that it was last caulked about the year 1400. Now that is probably just a couple of generations, 2-3 generations after the Maori arrived in New Zealand. I don't think there's any evidence of the Maori in New Zealand before 1314. When there was this volcanic eruption. I don't think we have evidence of humans anywhere below that layer of volcanic ash. And what's really magical, is that it has this tiny little turtle painted on it, which again is much more of a Polynesian symbol, I think, than a Maori symbol. I think that's fair to say. Hope I'm not stretching there with that. But assuming that you would carve a turtle facing the direction you want to travel, then this is presumably the back of the canoe that is surviving here. But isn't it such an incredible artifact? Isn't it such an incredible moment in history? Now, what are the oldest boats we've ever found, though? As far as I'm aware, the oldest boat archaeology has found is this. It's called the Pes canoe. It's about 10,000 years old and was made from the hollowed out trunk of a pine tree. Comes from Holland, the Netherlands. It's very cool that a little canoe can survive for that long, but we do have indirect evidence for voyaging much older than that. First of all, just the existence of Aboriginal Australians shows that some voyaging must have gone down in the Paleolithic, because Australia has always been an island, or at least for millions upon millions of years. For the entirety of human evolution, Australia has been an island. There are also stone tools left by Neanderthals on Crete. They had to have gotten there somehow. Again, Crete was for sure an island. But neither of these voyages, I think, to Australia and to Crete were sort of true voyages over the edge of the horizon. However, people in the Pacific, they certainly did sail over the horizon. Check this out. This is Sakatari Cave in Okinawa, Japan. I can't get a good picture of it, but it's in this field somewhere. It's just down the road from the shop which says, "I'm in a shop with a face and purple bottoms." I don't know what that's about at all. Japanese people, what is this shop? And crucially, inside Sakatari Cave, they found a child's rib bone, a human child's rib bone, which could be radiocarbon dated. It turns out the child lived about 30,000 years ago, deep into the Paleolithic. Now, Okinawa is part of the Ryukyu island chain, which extends from basically Taiwan up to mainland Japan. The closest island to Taiwan, Yonaguni Island, is over 107 kilometers from Taiwan, and the distance from Okinawa to its most southern neighbor, Miyako Island, is 300 kilometers. So either way people traveled, whether it was down through mainland Japan or up from Taiwan, still would have involved big sea crossings, big sea voyages. These are voyages that were certainly over the horizon for Paleolithic people. It's really incredible. Whoever was doing it, very comfortable with a life at sea. Like, it's so hard for us to put ourselves in that mind, because we're so used to living in a world full of humans, but they lived in a world totally empty of humans. There was no backup, there was no helicopter coming to get you, there was no support. If you decided to move your community to another island, you either made it to that island or you drowned. Basically, I suppose you could have turned back, but it's hard. It's really, really hard. These people had no help. They were out there on their own for everything. There must have been a big reward for that to compensate for such a huge risk. Maybe the fact that you would get your own island with no other humans around you was just a massive reward back then, right? Porghetti Vecchi in Italy. Here, archaeologists found 58 wooden artifacts dated to around 171,000 years ago. It seems they're not sharpened like spears. And they have rounded ends, which again is that like fantastic human ergonomic element, isn't it? There's something really cool about that. I love that. Neanderthals don't want splinters either. Now they are very similar to digging sticks. However, they were found alongside the remains of a straight-tusked elephant. Absolutely gigantic beast. I personally have never butchered an elephant, but I imagine it probably couldn't hurt to have some leverage when you're doing that, right? Cracking open ribs, busting apart these giant legs. Wooden tools also come in handy around the kitchen too. At the site of Abric Romani, just outside Barcelona, archaeologists uncovered what looks like the impression of perhaps a little trowel or a little spatula, a little knife, a chopper, something like that. The vast majority of wood had rotted away, basically just tiny fragments of wood left, but it did leave the impression of the tool. It's just a great reminder of how many wooden implements we must have lost. Humans are not merely practical beings, though. We do love some symbolism, we do love some ritual. I'm always harping on about it. There's one interesting thing I want to discuss here. So archaeological sites across Europe, there's so many post holes, guys. Post holes coming out the wazoo. And they're all the remains of buildings, racks, drying racks, fences, walls, and sort of totem poles. The vast majority, 99.99999% of them are all gone. But some, very few, across the whole continent survive. And there's none that is more spectacular than the Shagir idol. The Shagir idol was found in Russia in a peat bog in 1890. Carved from the trunk of a larch tree, there's really nothing quite like it. Apart from the brilliant face on top, the ooh, there are also 8 other human faces carved alongside it. They're kind of hard to make out, but you can kind of see them in this illustration. It's hard to make them out in the pictures, but the illustration shows it better. How tall it was when it was originally made is up for debate. I think I'm right in saying it was found in sort of 10 pieces, 10 parts, and its height depends on how these are reconstructed. And sadly, since 1890, some of those parts have also gone missing, so I don't believe we have all the pieces to accurately say how tall this sort of totem pole was. However, what's really astounding is the date of this thing. According to the radiocarbon dating, it is 12,000 years old. An incredible age, way back before the introduction of farming. This is the end of the Paleolithic period. People are living as hunters and gatherers on the Russian steppe. Who was it? What does it mean? I don't know, but it's a safe bet that it's some form of ancestor or god or spirit, something like that, right? God, it just makes you wonder how much we've lost. There are sort of random post holes found all over places, like at Stonehenge there are post holes. They're marked on the car park. These date to the Mesolithic period before Stonehenge was built, and you can't help but think, was something like the Shagir idol at Stonehenge? And when the Neolithic farmers arrived in Britain, they didn't pick this site to be a spiritual center. They merely, took over from the Mesolithic population that was already sort of worshipping there. It's fascinating to think about stuff like that. Transition between different cultures. Who learned from who took what from who. How long have these spiritual sites really been, worshipped by humans? Thousands of years, potentially. Thousands and thousands of years. There are several other wooden idols found across Northern Europe where there are bogs and conditions where these things are preserved. Denmark has already been mentioned in this video, but it's basically just the country is entirely bog. It's the best place to find wood in a whole archaeological record, probably. They have some incredible examples from the Neolithic and Bronze Age, like the Braak bog figures and the extremely excitable Broidenberg idol. Very happy chappy. But these statues even can be found in Britain, in my home country of Britain, and I was totally unaware of that before I researched this video. I feel like we're not making a big enough deal of these in Britain. But even from London, this is the chap called the Dagenham idol, believed to date to the Bronze Age, little cheeky chap, just about 40 centimeters tall, wooden idol. From up Yorkshire, we have the Roos Carr figures, made of yew and given sort of quartz-eyed eyes. Very eerie looking. I had no idea these things existed. I had no idea. And I love archaeology. I love British archaeology. We need to do a better job of highlighting these things. It makes you wonder how many of those post holes were just full of prehistoric masterpieces that we have now lost. Makes you think.